Hello, everybody. Welcome to a Friday Fireside Chat where we actually have the fire on, and Rick has a fire too. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Rita McGrath, and my guest this week is Rick Goings, who is one of my all-time heroes as a CEO, a business leader, and now a real philanthropic genius. Couple of quick admin things. This is being recorded, so do not say anything you do not wish your mother or the New York Times to log into. Without further ado, welcome, Rick. So a couple of quick words about Rick. Former enlistee in the Navy, then ran his own business as a serial entrepreneur, and I'd love to kind of get some reflections on that. Then sort of knocked around the world for Avon and a couple of other global companies before taking on a very successful role as the CEO of Tupperware, massively expanding a brand that everybody had kind of given up for dead, and now is doing, as I said, philanthropic things, and I understand writing a book. So you are writing a book, right?
Well, you know what? I was just sitting here going over this with Eleanor Steele, whose name is on mine because I was, for some reason, couldn't get into yours. And you know what? I've got stacks of things, but I am getting stalled to the point that I am so busy. By the way, Leonardo da Vinci used this, and I'm no Leonardo da Vinci, as an excuse. He said, I'm so busy kind of pursue my education on different things that I've never had time to publish. So that may continue to be the point with me, because I've had other venues where I can share thoughts, ideas, and interact, which are a lot more, I think, dynamic than a book.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, if you ever need an itinerant academic to listen to what you have to say, just let me know. Meanwhile,
you would be somebody I would pick, because it's interesting. We see each other in all these international locations, but hardly ever in the U.S. I think we did a Fortune one once when we were prepping for what we were going to do at the Vatican on really the purpose of corporations. Business. So it's good to see you both in this country.
Absolutely. It's nice to both be here. So the chat has a bunch of links to articles either by Rick or about Rick, and so forth. So I thought I'd start with, I think we met for the very first time. I can't remember whether it was Jeff Sonnenfeld's event at Yale or at Davos. Don't you love being able to drop names like that? It's awesome. Jeff Sonnenfeld used to run this, still does run this CEO Summit. And I believe you came and you had like the best swag. Like you had, everybody walked home with Tupperware swag, which I still have in my kitchen. It was great. But you started off, as I understand it, in the Navy. And then began your first business. Now, this is an interesting case to me because you were way ahead of the curve. So back in the day, young people, this is true, fire detectors were not required. They were not legally required. And, the technology had gotten to the stage where you actually could use them. And so you really started a crusade to get people more aware of fire safety. And my guess is that was probably one of the things that prompted it to eventually become a law.
Yeah, actually we did. We called it, the company was Dynamics, and we called it the fire safety. You'd wear a badge and said Fire Safety Crusade. And what most people don't understand is that when people die in home fires, it's usually between 10 o'clock at night and 6 in the morning. And they smell smoke or something, they get up, take one breath of superheated air. And it seemed like a brilliant idea. We never had anybody who died in a home fire that had our detectors, but there were issues on the business side of that, Rita. I thought I was a rock star in my 20s after I started it, because it exploded across the country. And then the federal government came in and mandated detectors, and Sears started selling for $5 what we were selling for $50. And that was my first real big need to pivot.
Well, you were still young enough that it wasn't a
Yeah.
devastating blow, as I understand it. And so I'm told, I read this in one of your biographies, that you keep a card in your wallet that reads, and I'll see if I can get this right: life's journey is not to arrive at the grave safely in a well-preserved body, but rather to skid in sideways, totally worn out, and shouting, "Wow, what a ride!"
Yeah, I do. And that wasn't my original quote. It's from a book in the 50s, and it includes a vulgar word when you're shouting. But yeah, it does remind you to be more, I think, adventurous and aggressive about what life's supposed to be all about.
Mhm. So after the business kind of got competed away by actions beyond your control, was that about the time you went to Avon?
No, it was right. Actually, right before that. You want to talk about being ahead of the curve? Wait, I've got to grab this.
Okay.
Uh, this was another one that I was ahead of my time. Started this. I just found one of these. Oh, Fortunate Pet. I was 27 when we created that, and it's for lucky pets with loving owners. And I said, "Oh, this is going to be brilliant." And the net of it is that we ran out of money in that one. So eventually, that's when people asked me. They said, "You're in your 30s. Why'd you go to Avon? You were an entrepreneur." And I've often kidded. I said, "Let's see. I needed a job." And it was the most important business decision I ever made.
Mhm. Mhm. But it wasn't Avon in the US, right? It was Avon Germany?
It was first in the US. It's interesting. My entrepreneurial years, I was in Charlottesville, and I had the dean of the law school and the business school on my board. So I could audit whatever, because I've had a non-traditional education background. So that came up, and it was Avon in New York, and they wanted me in strategy. They had brought a culture that was so much of individuals in silos. They had very few general managers, and I'd done some of it really well and some of it not so well. That was my doctoral learning. And so I went there, and within a year, boom, off to Europe. And that's why all this was, Rita, when I went to New York, I was certain everybody was going to be smarter than me. They all went to schools like you went. And I said, I went to this Quaker college, and I said, I'm not going to be able to make it there. At first, I found out, they were all just like me, and they were wonderful people. And I found out, I've even said this to, one of my sons. I said, it's good to be with a company where there's a lot of smart people in the room, and they helped me. They so much helped me, and I've kept those relationships for many years.
That's wonderful. That's great. And then 1992 brings you to Tupperware. And when you walked in the door there, what did you find?
Well, I had circled the globe by then. I had run companies for Avon in Europe, and then I went to Hong Kong and did all that for Avon, and then came to Tupperware. And I came, Rita, because I was attracted to the brand. And it was Dart and Kraft had split up, and they created this company called Primark, Premium Trademarks, and all the non-food businesses. So they brought me on the Primark board and to Tupperware, and that was the right question. I had to ask myself, what do we have to work with here? And I assembled. It's interesting. The first issue I had was everything was moving slow there, and so people would say, I'd say, "Hey, I need that tomorrow. I need it by 8." It was urgency because the business wasn't doing well at all. And they said, "Well, wait a minute. You want it fast?" I said, "Yeah." They said, "But you want it right." I said, "Here's an interesting observation. I want it fast and right." And I did it in a jovial way, it became the slogan of the company that
Wow.
we do things fast and we do them right. And that was kind of a Navy Marine Corps attitude that you're never going to have all the information. And Patton used to say it that a good plan executed now violently beats a perfect one next week. So our guys became that kind of 85% solution, and they became much more gazelle-like. So the answer we said was, hey, we've got a brand. We have the power of actual demonstration of product, and we have the opportunity with women. So many women are looking for an opportunity. And I've got to say, we reversed the order and we said, we're leading with the power of women. We're going to put behind it the power of them creating demonstration and leverage the power of the brand. And it worked.
That was early. That was early. I mean, I remember back in the 90s, I mean, Tupperware in the US had kind of been given up as irrelevant. That, I mean, women were by then in the workforce in huge numbers. They didn't want to spend their evenings sitting around looking at kitchen stuff. Certainly it was sort of seen as your dad's brand or your mom's brand, right?
Yeah.
But you really just proved everybody wrong. You really went overseas, right? And you've talked about the sort of home party networking as the social network of its time. Really growing up that idea that women would build their own networks and bring other people in and become almost trusted friends, to people they might not even know.
Well, that's what, from Davos, my friend Richard Edelman always does this trust barometer. And what we were leveraging is not only women, but the power of the trust that her network had and her. And we had to make some changes with it because what the company had done in the 80s was go up against the product line had been commoditized by Rubbermaid that really grew with Walmart and Kmart. And we said, wait a minute. I remember some of our product guys came in and said, well, let's come out with products we can really compete with them. And I said, not a chance. And I have a friend who teaches at Tuck, Richard Diavini, and Richard.
Oh, sure. Rich is a great friend of mine.
Oh,
great. We actually were in just parallel to each other at Columbia, and then later. Yeah.
Well, I've loved Richard, and I would go up there and work with students for a couple of days. But Richard makes everybody read von Clausewitz, and one of the great lessons there is with altitude, you have advantage. That's why they always built castles on hills, etc. You have the power of observation. You can pour hot oil over there. And so I said to our guys, we're not going to compete with Rubbermaid. We're going to go where they can't go. And so we went much more upscale to, I mean, we started using highly engineered resins and, things that were on the space stations, or we were helping them develop for up there. And then what unlocked it is you had this fabulous woman who would demonstrate it, and she had already a bond of trust.
So talk a little bit about, you've won the French Legion of Honor for your work really empowering women and girls. And I know you've got a very well-developed philosophy about that. And, I always think of you when I read these reports about, oh, well, it's a pipeline problem, or, oh, women aren't ambitious, or women don't put themselves forward. And you may know, I run this course at Columbia called Women in Leadership. And, I read this stuff and I'm just like, well, lived experience suggests those are not the reasons why women are not making more progress. So maybe share a little bit about your philosophy, because I think it's unusual, which is a shame, but it's also teachable. People can learn to do this.
Absolutely, it is. And, it's one of those things, the popular jargon is hiding in plain sight. I've just been so amazed that more people didn't leverage that sooner. I mean, the real impetus that should have been the wake-up call for everybody was in the Second World War in this country and all over the world, the Rosie the Riveter. She comes back and she found out she can raise the kids and do this, the power of women. And actually, she wanted to do more. And how that first big modification at Tupperware is we weren't talking to her about making pin money. We were talking to her about financial independence and building a career by building other women. And so we started to work on that. And Rita, I continued to be surprised in my entire career of women who had almost no advantage or opportunity. And when you gave it to them, what they would do. And it's interesting how wonderful they would do it. If you give a guy $1, he'll spend 90 cents on himself. She'll spend 90 cents on her family and friends. And she really is this incredible go-giver. So we started to build, you know what I really keep in mind? The other thing I keep it on my cell phone. I keep, so many people are judged by, what school you go to is, cognitive tests. And I got to tell you, I was sitting, Condi Rice and I were sitting, I brought her on the Boys and Girls Club National Board, and we're sitting there, some award ceremony, and we were talking about achievement tests. And I brought up to here, I said, Condi, I was so embarrassed I think I got 1,150 on mine. And Condi turns to me and she said, you beat me by 10 points. And imagine how smart Condoleezza Rice is. I didn't do well on those kinds of tests. So it led me down, and this is the thing I keep on my phone. I said, I've got it on a piece of paper. So, okay, qualities not measured by cognitive tests, okay? Reliability, persistence, enthusiasm, courage, passion, discipline, compassion, motivation. So I meet a woman in the Philippines, Susan, my wife and I, we come back from the meeting there, and she said, I was sitting next to a woman who was living 5 years ago in a lean-to, and she got a bowl of Tupperware to keep, the insects out of her food. And now her kids are in college in Canada. And woman's got an 8th grade education, but she had these qualities. So we're spending a little bit too much time on cognitive. And these are the qualities when you really start to say, what's going to be important from leaders in the future? Because many people say, well, this is soft stuff. Right. Give it to me every day.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, and it connects to a whole series of other things that we're learning, right? Which is the power of stories rather than facts and logic, right? The importance of being persuaded by a really compelling story rather than a really doubtful PowerPoint. And I think what I'm finding with leaders, and you've talked about creating a safe operating landscape, which is very akin to Amy Edmondson's idea of psychological safety. And how do you do that? Because I have a lot of leaders who come to me and, I work with a lot of CEOs, right? And mostly male and well-meaning. These are not like evil people, but they've never had this training. They've never had this experience. So how do you, what are some steps people can take to get started with this idea of a safe environment?
Well, Rita, I think it really starts off with having a mindset where, I was raised a Lutheran, went to a Quaker school, but I'm mostly a Buddhist. And you start off with a basic attitude, which is the respect for people and their innate qualities. And that if you are put in a serious position of leadership, I have a little sign that's on my in my office here that basically says my responsibility is to create an operating environment where people can become the best versions of themselves. I've had that 35 years so that I believed very much in performance, but I always say you create an environment where you could recruit talented people or potentially had talent where you may not see it on the surface, but create the operating environment for that you in fact develop them, you give them responsibilities, and then reward them. I mean, I think one of the things I'm proudest of, I never had a member of my senior management team in any one of my assignments quit and go somewhere else. Never had it happen. And it isn't because I was easy. We worked hard together at it. But what was his name? The Greek, he wrote Zorba, the Greek, Konstantzakis. He said, don't give me friends, give me comrade in arms. And so I would have these men and women around me that this was what we were doing with passion and purpose. Oh, and by the way, we could support our families too, and many others could.
So one of the things, just to go back to women for a minute, that and to be really sort of pragmatic for just a sec, one of the things you talk about is putting women in P&L positions. Where they actually are responsible for business results. And I remember you saying at some venue, I forget which one, but you said women come up through the R's, HR, IR.
I've said that actually at investor relations meetings, yes. And there's nothing disrespectful about the R's, but it's generally, it's not the spawning ground in the minds of others for leadership people. That's always been viewed as, well, that's just support.
Yeah. Well, and I think that there's a hesitancy, right, to take someone who's been in those staff roles and actually hand over a mission critical function. That people really are concerned about that. And it does take, there is learning that happens when you're actually having to deliver results on a regular basis.
Yeah.
So we have a question from our chat, which is, what are some of the most difficult decisions that you've had to make, and how would you sort of frame that for other people to learn from your example?
Well, firstly, I would tell you the most difficult decisions have been with regard to people that you have been in your organization mentoring, sponsoring, when they are failing or not achieving results. What do you do? That's the most challenging. Okay, and I'm going to come right back to that. Let me tell you what the easiest ones are.
Great. Okay.
If somebody has, I saw this years ago when I was chairman of Boys and Girls Clubs of America. Denzel Washington and I were going through the Atlanta club, and somebody had written on the wall, and it was a kid that wrote it. It says, "Character's what you do when nobody's watching." The easiest decisions I've ever had to make is if we had somebody in the organization and they exhibited behavior that didn't really honor our culture, our character, it was unethical. They were gone before they knew it. Those were just so easy. You're out of here. You're out of here. Now back to the other one.
And would you explain? Would you say what the reason was?
Oh, no, we would sit there and we'd go through, here's what happened. You pushed things in the quarter. They were out of period. That's against GAAP. You abused people along the way. And, really early on in my tenure, this is the tone at the top, how things are done here. And I didn't create it. I just supported it and surrounded myself with people that we had shared values. And God, what was his name, Rita? He wrote many people thought, it's not a very sophisticated book. Leadership is an art.
Mm-hmm.
It talked about storytelling and how you built these cultures. So when you found outliers, and it didn't happen very often, by the way, we would usually catch that on the way in or early when they were still junior.
Mm-hmm.
Now, here was the challenging ones. I've had people get into a senior position and got them in a position that they just didn't do well in that particular culture. And again, when 92% of your sales and your revenue is from markets outside the United States, you better understand the chess game of where you put people. And I never will forget, I had this one person, brilliant, but detail-oriented, came up through finance and put him over a portfolio of countries. They just wanted to kill him. He was into every detail. And you know what I did? I figured out a way. I said, what's he really good at? He was one of the best teachers of the preliminary skills of the business. Moved him to Asia Pacific, and he was the key person that taught these young leaders in China, India, Indonesia. My goodness, 3 billion population. He was a master. And before he finally retired, I look back and say, we owe, and the shareholders owe, what happened in Asia Pacific to his good work there, because we got him the right match.
Yeah.
And he was a natural at it.
Well, and I think that's one of the big problems with traditional hierarchies. And I want to get to your view of the new world of work too. But in traditional hierarchies, there's only so many roles to go around. And so finding that match between what people are good at, how they're prepared to behave, what they're prepared to give is not always so easy. Because, there's a prescribed path sort of to the top, whatever the top means these days.
Yeah.
And it's problematic. So you wrote a piece recently in, I think it was in Inc. or something, about the future of work, in which you mentioned the non-cognitive skills and the idea of technology, these sort of demographic fault lines, and the notion of talent demographics really changing. And that what we really need to be thinking about is work in the context of an ecosystem. And I think a lot of people would be super interested in your view on that.
Yeah, well, here's one of my great concerns, and we spent a lot of time at Davos for my 15 years there. I really focused on two things that for my participation at Davos was really, gender parity and women's empowerment. And 15 years ago, the only subject where we talked about women was the Nike tent, which was not in the Congress Hall. And last year, there were a dozen of them going on. So it's moving forward. But simultaneous, and these are interrelated, the future of work. I would be, the woman, one Pumzeli, who ran UN Women, and we were in South Africa together, and we did a Q&A with all these dynamic young women in the audience, and they were talking, and their whole hopes were when the cavalry was coming, when Google was coming, when blah, blah, blah. And they had to have STEM. And I gave the message that the cavalry probably wasn't coming there. And that when you look at the majority of women right now are over 25 years old. So we're going to give up on 50 years of a human's life because she didn't get STEM training there. And so it gets down to the point that how do you leverage the qualities she has and put her to work so that she really feels of value? She can help support her family. And by the way, this is the wave of the future, because the numbers right now suggest that just under 50% of all emerging market households by 2030 will be run by women. And so how do you find those things? And that's why Uber's had their problems, but a quick story. So I'm there where our headquarters is in Orlando, where we're Florida residents. And I'm going to go out one night and meet one of our senior vice presidents for dinner at a Italian restaurant. And I had Uber pick me up because I knew that we were going to have, he's a Brit, and we were going to drink some wine. Okay. The woman picks me up, probably 60 years old, late model, SUV, little girl sitting in the front. And I'm kind of interviewing on the way there. Her name was Louise. And how long you been doing this? 3 months. What were you doing before? Disney. I was cleaning rooms. Okay, how's it going? She said, I'm making twice as much money, and I can drop her off at school and pick her up. Okay, go to dinner. She says, can I wait for you or come back here? And I said, yeah, it'd be wonderful. I continued the discussion. I said, what'd you have to learn, Louise? She said, well, I knew how to drive. She said, she leaned back. She said, honey, I was driving when I was 14. I said, okay, got that. She said it was a tractor, but this is easier. Then she said, I knew Orlando. I've lived here. She said, I had to learn how to work this darn device here so I could communicate with it. But I got that in about 2 days. And I said, so this is working for you. She said, oh, is it working for me? And the little girl was gone by then. And I said, where'd she go? She said, oh, I brought her home. So I went back and I went through my list and I said, what qualities do I believe Louise had? She checked every one of the boxes. By the way, she had a 10th grade education. And there was one she had I didn't know about, compassion. That wasn't her daughter or granddaughter. It was a homeless girl she had been raising for 2 or 3 years. I mean, amazing.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, Rita, that's where, when I see all these new gig economy, and this all came out of, I've got a buddy who's writing a book on the gig economy, and we were just talking about it, and he said, this came out of the rock and roll business. I got a gig tonight, but it's coming together with the trends of millennials don't want to have a job. They would rather stitch together gigs. We've got to find gigs that, some non-cognitive ones, so we don't lose these 2 generations who are over 25 years old right now. And that's why I love the Airbnbs. Oh God, there was a list of them I started writing down. They're out there. And that's what Tupperware did. We provided it. She had all these other things. All we had to do was give her the template. Mm-hmm. Forgive the long answer, but
no, I love it.
I'm enthusiastic about it.
I love it. I think it's fantastic. Well, one of the things that I think is interesting, if you think about the broad sweep of history, right? And you talk about this in your article, people used to work for themselves. So they worked, either they were in a guild, so they were professionals in their day, and they worked with others who were in the guild, and they started off as apprentices, and then they gained mastery, and then they became professionals in their own right. So artists, shippers, traders, or they were working in agriculture, but largely they had enormous autonomy. Now, they didn't have a lot of wealth by and large. I mean, they were pretty in poor conditions by today's standards, but they had a tremendous amount of autonomy. And if you worked hard and figured out your craft, you could succeed on your own terms. And then we had industrialization. And what I think is interesting is that the reason we had factories and office buildings and stuff like that was the assets were expensive and scarce. So you had to go to a place where the mill was, or where the machine was, or whatever. And what I think we're learning, and certainly that's been accentuated this past year, we are learning that a lot of those assets, are distributed now. They're out there, right there. So you can actually run a doctor's practice, and all your patients can basically have equipment at home that allows them to do the normal things, take their blood pressure, do a prick, get a small sample. I mean, even medical care can now be, in many cases, distributed. So one of the things that I think is fascinating is that we have so many leftover assumptions of the central assets that we need to do our jobs being centralized rather than distributed. And I think what we may be on the cusp of, and we'll see, is that that we can now see people acting entrepreneurially, kind of back in that guild, tradesman, perfect your craft. And where I go to find early warnings of this is Instagram. There are 16-year-olds on Instagram earning more than their parents because they have a genius for something that interests other people, and they're prepared to put in the hours to make it happen. And I'm not sure that that is like a socially, like, is that where I want the future entrepreneurs of the world to focus their energy? But it certainly is an interesting early example.
Well, do you know, this is where I was a history pre-law major. I wish more people understood history because it was so important what you went through there about from the industrial age. You and I talked about this once when we were at the Peter Drucker in Vienna. This whole concept of before the 1840s, people didn't have jobs. Really, it was, you could go through the various ways that you already discussed. And very interesting. I was reading something yesterday. The average factory worker, according to the US government, in the year 1890 in this country worked 100 hours a week. And it was to leverage the asset that you talked about. And it wasn't until when people say, wow, the 40-hour work week, man, that's existed forever. 1926, Henry Ford, 5 days a week, 8 hours a day. It didn't exist before then.
And $5 a day. $5 a day.
Yes.
I mean, he was excoriated by his patrician colleagues because how could anybody afford to pay that kind of money? And his answer I thought was terrific. He said, look, I'm a smart capitalist. If I don't pay my workers enough that they can buy my cars, I'm at a dead end. So I'm going to pay them well, and I want everybody else to too.
That's one of the coming attractions, because I kind of always am working on, every time I did a strategic document or plan or presentation, I would never hard bind it. It would always be loose leaf, because I said strategy represents, and you've always used the term with regard to, Michael Porter became, sustainable competitive advantage. I shifted toward transient competitive advantage when you started talking that way, because every strategy represents, to me, and every speech I ever gave represents my thinking when I ran out of time and with current things. And I think one of the big things you're going to see with regard to entrepreneurs, gig economy, is beginning with this whole millennial group. They don't want to be slaves to time anymore. They said, wait a minute, if I can do productivity and I can get it done before that, why should I have to be sitting around 40 hours a week watching? That's why I would always hate being inside an office. I would walk outside because I feel like my life is being robbed inside. So.
Indeed. So one of the questions, and I want to get to your philanthropic work in just a sec, but one of the questions that came in ahead of this call was looking at something that is called your PACT, Personal Accountability Commitment Today. And I think that's something we could all learn from. So kind of, what have I learned? What action I will take? What impact I expect from my activities? And I'm not sure very many of us are that disciplined about that.
Well, I've got to say, I think maybe because I went to a Quaker school and I have been I've done transcendental meditation since I was 30 years old, twice a day. I don't care where I am. I could be in a war zone and I'm going to meditate. Those kinds of, that spirituality, I think, helps you be more reflective along the way. And that's why, I every single day, I have a buck card. A staff person, my assistant used to give it to me, but I do myself one every day. And how my personal accountability, this is things I have to do today, but if you could see the top, the first thing is AV. And then it says 190, and then, okay, AV means add value. I write, and I've had somebody say to me, well, wait a minute, Rick, you can print your name on one of these things. Why don't you just have that printed? I said, not a chance. I have got to craft it every day myself. And so, by the way, mine says AV, add value. And so I start out thinking that 190, I'm never going to weigh more than 190 pounds. So I never get so far away from that I can always get right back there. Third, KGWA. I've always said this 40 years, kind and gentle words and actions. And I wrote under it P. I always call my wife pretty. First time I met her, it wasn't very cool. I said, wow, you're pretty. So I said, especially to Susan. Then I have NS, means no swearing. And why do I have that? I was in the Navy. You'd get up and the main word you would use started with an F. And you do it in wonderful, great effing day. How the F are you? I mean, all of a sudden I had to break myself of that. So I won't swear. And the last one, SDC, stand down from conflict. So, I mean, that's back to that question again. I mean, I've done reasonably well, but I try to monitor it. And I try to keep, I'm still clay as far as I'm concerned.
Mm-hmm. That's inspiring. I think, a lot of people underestimate the power of just simple practices like that. Like, I think we get ourselves all balled up in big Gordian knots over, oh my God, I've got to change my life. I've got to do this. And I always tell people, change how you use an hour a week, change how you use the first 10 minutes of the day, make a card for yourself, right? I mean, just as a reminder, I think that's fantastic. So let's talk about.
I gotta say that one of the reasons I've always felt such a glow about you, or when you talk to people, you always would provide them with approachable solutions, how they could succeed, make their life better. And you weren't doing it from some esoteric platform. I mean, and that's very, very, very much a gift. And it doesn't exist in a lot of graduate business schools.
This is unfortunately very true. So you've done wonderful things for Boys and Girls Club. You get a lot of credit with diversifying their board, helping them grow, really helping them have impact, and change the slogan, right? From the club that beats the streets to a positive place for kids. And not too long ago, I had Sylvia Acevedo, the former CEO of the Girl Scouts, with me.
Oh, yeah.
And she has a very, very well-developed philosophy at how girls learn, and kind of very, very interesting. So you brought it to Boys and Girls Clubs, then you took it international with the current organization, Youth League Clubs of America, I think, or Youth League Clubs nationally.
Yeah, they were not allowed. Boys and Girls Clubs of America by federal charter, and I was deeply engaged and chairman, but to do international clubs. So informally, we started opening clubs. I mean, and Rita, it would be opportunistic. Susan and my friend Wendy and Bo Bridges. Bo's in South Africa doing Free Willy 27 or whatever. And his son, he 40 years ago, he adopted a young 3-month-old African-American boy. Well, now Casey's 40. We leveraged Casey's experience, got him trained on how to do a Boys and Girls Club. So we first opened our first one in Soweto then. And then finally, we've decided we just had to create a global organization like the UN. So Susan and I, created and funded this World Federation of Youth Clubs. And I've had so much support from the guys and gals who we built Boys and Girls Clubs together there in Washington, D.C. and elsewhere. They're helping us do this on how we translate this.
Mm-hmm. And this could be a vehicle for, the young ones kind of connecting to this future of work theme, right? So
absolutely. Yeah, and you mentioned girls too, and the Girl Scouts, we created a program at Boys and Girls Clubs that we now implement elsewhere called Smart Girls. And Susan and I sponsored that. We had Tupperware sponsor it. And that you'd really teach a young girl about her body, her attitude, and respect for herself. It's just amazing. We would see some of the girls. My daughter runs some Boys and Girls Club. She's got an MBA, but she's running a Boys and Girls Club. She said, this is more important. Outside of Charlotte, they would bring the girls to a city like Washington, D.C., never been in a really nice bus before, never stayed in a hotel before, or had, I mean, that's the kind of things that you create repeater stations of these clubs. And let me quick commercial on something. When you look at where there's a club, you'll find the high school graduation rate goes way up. Teen arrests goes way down. Teen pregnancy, way down. I mean, you really see the results. And I've had often senior police officers say, we don't need more cops in this town. We need more clubs.
That's inspiring, really inspiring. So how does that translate now to the virtual world? And we've had a couple of questions in the chat about how do you build trust? How do you create those communities when we're living on Zoom?
Well, you're getting to, I mean, from the woman that brought you seeing around corners, I mean, really, because this whole thing is about intellectual curiosity. We do believe clubs are a safe space. And I do believe that the best way to mentor and coach someone is you got to have time together. The office is never going to go away. That it's going to be an and in the future. But what we learned and how we pivoted at our clubs, we started making online content and activities for them. And I just had a kind of an hour discussion with our clubs in Mexico. And we've got a dozen clubs, the Club de Niños y Niñas in Mexico. And they have done a fabulous job sharing content and developing content, really creative. You know, our biggest issue is many of the kids, they have a tablet or some kind of a device. They don't have Wi-Fi. And so we've said, you know what? We've got to start. That's where our organization, we've got to work to knock down those kinds of barriers in markets. But we're still moving forward, step at a time with this. We have now 32 affiliated countries that have boys and girls clubs, or whatever the youth club is called in that particular market.
That's brilliant. I think that's brilliant. And of course, when you get that kind of scale, they can learn from each other. So get content developed for one group. And I mean, one of the nice things that I think one of the things we're learning about Zoom is that, and similar platforms, is so much of what you can do now is horizontal. It cuts across. It's not buried in silos. It can move very readily from one context to another. And while there are negatives to that, there's also some real positives. I mean, certainly at Columbia, what we're learning is that for many people, it's better. I mean, I'll just take my Women in Leadership program as an example. I mean, we've got women in Latin America, in Asia, in Canada, and I mean, all over. Many more women, by the way, in the public sector who could not, who could never justify flying to New York, staying in a hotel, but really, really could benefit from the course. So I think even when it becomes normal to have in-person activities again, I still think there's going to be a much more receptivity to a hybrid mode.
I think the changes that are going to be happening here in the new normal, they're going to be, I think the most important word going forward for people to remember is and all these things that we've learned. By the way, for those who, it says Eleanor Steele on my screen because I couldn't get through in mine. And Eleanor Steele was our global head of communications and women's issues. And I want a real important shout out. When the government asked us to go to Baghdad during the war, it was 2011, Eleanor joined me there, and we created from that time there a program called Global Links, because as we spoke to young women there, they wanted to learn to become entrepreneurs. There were no faculty, Rita, that had any skills. So we put a stick in the ground and I said, we're going to sponsor this. We went back and we got Rollins College and their Crumber Business School, which is the #1 business school in the state of Florida. They got behind it, and the State Department got behind it. And now we've taken that from Baghdad and Babylon to different locations in India, and now we're in Brazil with it, a learn and return. And she goes back there, she teaches them, then so it's been wonderful to see. It's still, we're still taking baby steps with it, but so blessed to have these kinds of initiatives, which is why I encourage other people, God, look for the ways you can add value. There's a lot of them out there hiding.
Absolutely. One topic that I know you and I are both pretty passionate about is this notion of companies being run for multiple constituencies, right? So your employees who give their life's work in some cases to the company, your communities, right, which are where people live and where they're nurtured. And so we've got this enormous conversation happening now about shareholders versus everybody else. And I know you've been an advocate for much more of a stakeholder view for a long, long time. Do you think we're seeing any progress?
Well, there's tension there right now that you basically, there were articles yesterday about, I think, the Tribune being acquired by a private equity firm and what's that going to do, et cetera. You have to sit there and say the tension of different business models out there. And you generally have in private equity, they're looking for a 3 to 5 year time horizon. And so by its nature, it's counter contributed to communities, short-term stakeholders. Interesting, 1965, the average share of stock was held for about 8 years. Now it's 6 to 8 months of it. So I think there's tension, but when we saw, you were part of that Fortune meeting we had in New York, and then a group of us, we actually went and met with the Pope, and the whole thing was the shift from to stakeholder value, and that put our oars in the water, and to really take issue with some of the Milton Friedman attitudes, because it was a different time that we're here for shareholder value. Well, if your shareholders there for 6 months, well, they want you to sell off every asset you can, monetize my thing, and I'm out of here. It's got to be the Mother Earth, the communities we serve, and the people who work there. That's where you got to reskill them. When I did at a session last year for Brightline, talked about the lack of responsibility in Detroit to leave a city like that and to leave it with the blight it has. So for everybody that says, I want their shiny new toy and idea, we've got a responsibility there to do it. And we've got, the Pope's endorsement. The Business Roundtable last year endorsed it. And my dear wife, Susan, and I meet when we're in New York from time to time to the holy sees of, permanent representative to the UN, and Monsignor Hilary Franco. And we keep bringing him up to date on it, and they keep the dialogue going with Rome on it. So, Rita, I think we're going to keep people like you who have platforms. We got to keep talking about it. It isn't either or. I will tell you, for my 25 years running Tupperware, we were 8 times Fortune most admired, best companies for leaders, most just companies. And the whole time we kicked ass with regard to running a business where our people out there made money. We even had the Global Fairness Initiative came in and wanted to look at the impact it had on women. And they did a study in Mexico and Indonesia, and they came back with these findings. After 3 years with us, she went from not thinking she's good enough to thinking I am good enough. 2, from lower class to middle class. 3rd, connected to other women. And 4th, in a world where 1 out of 3 women is abused, he actually started respecting her and many times worked for her. Forgive the long answer, but boy, you've picked some important subjects.
Well, I think it's critically important. So a couple of other facts that people may not be aware of is the Rand Corporation recently did an analysis. This is just in America, so not incorporating the effects of global trade on jobs, just in America, and said if the income distribution in the U.S. had remained the way it was in 1975, I believe they picked, was there would have been $52 trillion more wealth in the pockets of the bottom 90% of wage earners than there is today. I mean, $2.5 trillion a year that goes straight upward. And the problem is, and look, you don't have to be an economic genius to realize there's only so many yachts you can buy. There's only so many New York apartments you can buy. And if you give that money to somebody who is supporting a family and is, running a job and is maybe running their own business, they're going to spend a lot of it. And guess what? They're going to buy things like Tupperware, and pairs of pants and, whatever. So I think we really have lost the plot somewhere along the way.
It's got to be a change of attitude. I always would say at Davos, step number one with regard to really women's empowerment is changing the narrative from social justice. Because the moment you say it's not fair, you make a victim of her. This isn't about a victim. This is about, what are you, nuts? All this incredible potential that she could give, that she can change her old self-image. We did a study at Georgetown that shows you can cultivate confidence, and then you give her a template, things change.
Absolutely. Well, wow, that flew by very fast. So where do people go to learn more? Where would you steer them, those that want to get more into your world?
Well, I mean, this is that's where I'm such an intense reader on that. And it depends on the subject that I'm sitting there, say, on that. Do you know what? I do believe that one of the most important things right now for individuals out there is to get this balance of, we did a thing, we've got a group called Path North about really senior people who have made their mark. And I don't know why they included me, but I'm proud to be part of this. And we have a group of about 7 of us that meet. And we spent some time talking this last 2 weeks about the subject of your resume versus the eulogy. And I would like to see more people now, because nobody talks about somebody's resume when it's all said and done. Would really want to see, and this is where I'm so hopeful, because the young generations right now, they are sensitive to it. They expect it. Even if they've been more prosperous, they have a sensitivity to it. And for business to be able to engage them in either the gig or as associates, they're going to have to create that kind of a mindset change. And we start to talk about more of these values. I love that Project Oxygen at Google, where they thought, well, what makes our best managers? I had a copy. Oh yeah, I'm here. Copy here. Wait, it said the things that make our best managers, and the first of the 8, the first time they ever mentioned technical skills was number 8. All the other things were about enhancing the ability of individuals to become the best version of themselves. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, there's all kinds of stuff out there. I would encourage as many as possible, though, to dig into transcendental meditation. As a matter of fact, we're starting an initiative now called 21 to None. We have 21 veterans every day. They're committing suicide. And the Veterans Administration, we've just funded the 3rd study that shows teaching TM is better than any other form of psychiatric treatment at post-traumatic stress. It's fabulous. And the other reason, for those of us who have a vanity factor, TM, the studies show right now, a long-term meditator is 12 years younger physiologically than they are their chronological age.
Wow.
And by the way, new Harvard study just showed they took 80-year-olds and started teaching them to do transcendental meditation. And they had 4 groups there. After 3 years, the progress versus all the other groups, no one in the TM group had even died. And people in each one of the other groups had died and had various different things. There's a lot of data out there, and it's not a religion. It's not something to believe. I mean, it is, you're in a small boat on the top of the ocean, and the ambient environment can be rocky. This is my friend who really leads the David Lynch Foundation. You go 100 feet down. If you're a diver, it's always quiet down there. Your mind always has that. So anytime I can press people to do this, it's good for you. And they say, well, I don't have 20 minutes twice a day. Oh, yes, you could figure it out.
Totally. That's inspiring. That is totally inspiring. The other thing I think, just to close, is I think we have a lot more connections between our brains, which we always think of as thinking things, but they're also feeling things. They're also physiological things. And there was a really interesting recent study that showed that the job your brain does is actually keeping the rest of you appropriately balanced. And so it's not just thinking all the time, it's other stuff, it's regulating how you feel pain and how you take in information and a lot of other things. So I'll just echo that. I think that's a great note to end on. So
imagine if you could bring that to a calm place. And I've had it where I was on airplanes. I was once on a private airplane going over the Alps with 2 associates, senior to me. This is way back when. And all of a sudden, there were problems in the cockpit. And you can tell when they go switch from English, which is the language of the cockpit, to German, which I speak. And I said, this is not good. I meditated for that 20 minutes. My 2 friends, they hated it. They saw I was in a calm place. And then when we landed in Switzerland, I mean, this is such a wonderful tool. I don't know why most people, they won't try it, look at it, but it's growing and it's not a fad. When you've been doing it 40 years, it's not a fad.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, Rick Goings, thank you ever so much for spending an hour. We're already getting pleas in the chat to do it again. So to be continued.
Okay. I enjoyed time with you. You've always stimulated me. Thank you.
Thanks, Rick.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.